Hey y'all, I'm Victor E, and today I wanted to talk about anger, where it comes from, and how to manage it, how to live with it, right? So, to talk about anger, I wanted to use this story that I heard that I have some personal experience with, um, as well as reference Maston Kipp, who is a trauma researcher, and he has a lot of really good knowledge and a good book about how to kind of confront your own demons and manage your stuff a little wiser, a little better. So you're having a little more purpose and freedom and joie de vivre in your life. Dumb. Self-judgment. There it is. Acknowledge it, let it go. But the story begins with a family, a mom, a dad, and a kid. When they first, come into being as a family, the dad is working. He has kind of a desk job. The mom is doing well at home, cleaning, doing like the very traditional, family dynamic. And so when the dad gets home, the kid runs to the dad and, jumps on him and is very happy to see him. And because he's working a desk job, he has the energy. His body's, relatively well and comfortable in movement and things like that. He's an athletic kind of guy, that kind of dad. But they decide to move to a different place. And in this different place brings a different line of work. And now the dad and getting home is very sore. It's a much more physically demanding job. And it's the first time he gets home. Kid runs up to the dad, jumps on him, and the dad's like screams in agony. Very sore, in a lot of pain. And the kid internalizes this. It's a very small moment, very innocuous, but it is what we call a trauma inception. This kid who is used to loving their dad and having that love be received with open arms, sometimes literally and sometimes down the line figuratively, now has their love rejected. So the kid internalizes not only do I hurt people when I show them love, I have to withhold that love. And for such loving beings that children are, this creates a block in being and then becoming. We are becoming based on a pattern, based on a blueprint that's formed during formative years in our childhood that later get reinforced in adolescence. And a lot of people go through life carrying that emotional block, that tension. One of the leading causes, especially in the US, of let's say premature, of a death that is preventable, is hypertension. Tension in the muscles creates a state of dis-ease, which then, held over long enough periods of time, create diseases, which then go on to kill us. But in letting these tensions, these traumas go, it relaxes our body. It allows us to go inward, to find ourselves, to find our inner child and reparent them, right? So coming back to the subject of anger and frustration, when this little kid started to then play out that pattern of When I love, people get hurt. I must withhold that love. Whenever they get an opportunity to love, now instinctively, reflexively, they withhold it. It's kind of like if, you put your hand over a fire, you immediately recoil and withdraw it, right? More than that, going a little deeper than that, there's a holding of the breath. And it's the same thing whenever we are hurt or hurt ourselves. There's that same kind of sucking in and tensing of the body. When people talk about like Messenkip or the guy who wrote The Body Keeps the Score of the book, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, when trauma specialists, psychologists talk about the snapshot that the body takes in a moment of trauma, it's a little more literally than not. It's not just a memory. That memory is stored within your body. And not being able to love or receive love from a parent, from our caregivers, from those who are going to teach us, it brings into question our likelihood for survival, for continuing on with or without a tribe, more fear-based if it's without a tribe. But I mean, like, just for a second, that's, in terms of generational trauma, that's one of the most feared things. That's why people are so afraid to get on stage for, let's say, like stand-up or for a performance. There is such an inherent fear in doing or saying something that will get you kicked out of the tribe, right? And why people are afraid of dying alone is because if they are alone, they are more likely to be, let's say, picked off by a predator or not have suitable means to get by on their own, in the wild. The wild has changed and it's a lot more accommodating, especially like here in the US. I mean, usually. But especially like during this Corona thing, it's brought up a lot of those fears to be faced, essentially. When we face our fears, we see that we can get through them. And when we get through them, it creates a different kind of snapshot in the body. One that says, I can get through it. And from there, we are free to take a little more, let's say, discerned risk or risk-taking. So if I can get myself through it, if I can build that resilience, that embodied knowledge, I can then take a slightly bigger risk and from there start to build up on something. Coming back to the example that I set with a child, being loving and cooperative is just in our nature. It's at our core as human beings. So when we feel we are unable to do this, it kind of gets backed up, if that makes sense. When we have this thing within us that we want to express, but we can't, and we can't even remember why, it just builds on the frustration. It builds on the anger, causing us to become even angrier, to lash out at the people we love. And when we lash out at the people we love, when they see us being so angry, so unapproachable because we feel so unlovable, suddenly it reinforces the idea that we cannot love, that we have to withhold it. And that's just one source of anger. A lot of the times, anger is a more secondary or tertiary response. This is to say that before there's anger, there is something else. And before there's something else, there's usually something else. Trauma itself, its definition, is disconnection from safety. So in that moment when we felt disconnected from safety. For some people, it manifests later on as being unworthy of being loved, i.e., being safe, being nurtured, being supported, until they feel unworthy of love, which creates frustration and then which creates anger. For some people, that's, shame. It's guilt. Guilt is something that I struggled with a lot, especially my time in service. There was some things that happened over there, and one of the biggest things that it hits on is helplessness. Sometimes we are helpless, and anger almost becomes a compensation for that, for a time when we felt helpless. And so if we feel strong and powerful now, it's almost showing our younger self that we will no longer be made to feel helpless. But that's just a part of life. It really is. And no amount of anger will ever make up for that. So this kind of brings up a secondary point of why so many people have a hard-on for meditation, myself included. Meditation is just the act of coming back to your breath. It's observing the thoughts that you're having that are coming up and passing by without necessarily identifying that you are the one thinking them. It's more like they are just kind of happening, like traffic, like clouds in the sky, and you were simply there to observe them without running out into traffic or reaching up to mess with the clouds. But why does that matter? Why do so many people like this? Well, if you are an anxious, depressed, maybe even angry person, why it's so helpful and important to start is because of the reflexive behavior that it becomes. If I suddenly start practicing, meaning just like I practice martial arts, or in the service I practice shooting, I practice writing or comedy or painting. When I first start out, it's something new, it's something very unfamiliar, and I may struggle, and a lot of people don't like to struggle. They don't like to be reminded that they are not great at something. We want to be great. We want to be recognized as people. That's just natural. But the reason this is so important is because whenever the unexpected happens, whenever something triggering happens, suddenly this practiced and learned and conditioned behavior of coming back to your breath becomes a lot more reflexive. It becomes like when they tap your knee with that thing on the doctor, your knee just kind of does a thing on its own. So too does coming back to your breath and being aware of the anger, of the emotion, and choosing, instead of acting on it, instead of continuing down that train of thoughts, choosing to come back to your breath. Instead of letting yourself get taken in that stream of consciousness, in that stream of intense emotion that's very much like its own kind of high, its own kind of addiction. Trust me, it's then a practiced behavior built slowly over time to instead observe your breath, instead of acting on it and creating that same kind of pain within yourself, externalizing it on someone else or something else. Simply observing your breath, simply sitting with the emotion. That's step one. Eventually, once you get the practice of it, you can start to dig deeper. Why am I feeling this way? Where does this come from? Where does this want to take me ultimately? Right, we're angry for however long. Where does that road lead unless we intervene on ourselves? Because a lot of us, there's the phrase waiting for Superman for a reason, waiting for a parent to intervene, waiting for a friend, an authority figure, someone to come into our lives and save us from our unknown subconscious programs. That someone has to be ourselves. And it starts with taking a breath. When we start to meditate, we start to get a better picture of the kind of things that were put into our minds by people we looked up to, people who led by example in very formative years. And once we start to distance ourselves from that, we get to be ourselves. We no longer have to identify with the people in our lives who were toxic or negative influences. To take it a step further, you can start to journal. And once your thoughts are then on paper, you get to see again over time what kind of thoughts you're having consistently. And instead, you can change the story. You can see what the story is, first of all, and then write a new one for yourself. I hope you start writing a new one for yourself. Anger is something that I struggled with and still kind of struggle with to this day. I do. But it's something that I'm very grateful to be the manager of and not the victim of anymore. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Much love. Peace.